Hello, this is Curt Pringle, and thank you for tuning into the Talking Issues series. You know, here in Orange County in Southern California, over the years, we've all seen how development has occurred, really has grown, and created much of what Orange County is, San Diego County, San Bernardino, and Riverside for that matter. And much of that development, particularly housing development, created this internal battle between development, communities, home builders, and the environmental conservationist communities within Southern California. It's interesting. I lived through a lot of that and really saw a lot of those battle lines. But as the county has grown, as the Southern California has grown, much of that development now is no longer in virgin territory and native habitat, but is infill development. And many of those battles of the past have gone away. And there's a greater cooperation between all parties that once were maybe combatants in that development premise. And today I have somebody really special, someone who has seen all of those battles, but today is working so closely to advance from infrastructure to housing to other important principles, but at the same time maintaining her commitment to environmentalism and conservation. So I want to welcome Melanie Schlotterbeck.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. I mean, one of the founding issues in Southern California was the creation of Chino Hills State Park. And I know your mother, Claire, and you and your aunt and many others were some of the principal folks behind preserving land and setting it aside for that state park. I think it was established in 1984, and it really is a part of four different counties: Riverside, San Bernardino, LA, and Orange.
hmm
So tell me about that process. I mean, under the organization Hills for Everyone, I think that's a group that's still alive and promoting a lot of these issues. So tell me how that first attempt at creating that state park and that preserve, that land set aside, how did that come about?
It came about because of my mother. That's my personal story. But before my mom was a gentleman named Dave Myers, and he actually just passed this last March or so, March of 2025. And he had this vision that we needed to do something to protect the hills. He had seen one too many ridge lines bulldozed. He grew up in La Habra, and so he hiked all around and learned the birds, the plants, all about nature, and decided that there wasn't anyone that was going to step forward to do something. And so he took it on as a personal mission. And one summer, after my family had moved from Michigan back to California in 1978, my mom joined the homeowners association to get involved with her community and ended up going to a presentation of this fledgling group called Hills for Everyone, and ended up getting recruited by Dave to participate in this grand vision that he had to create a state park. Because it was in so many counties, it didn't make sense to do a regional park, and it wasn't special enough like Yosemite to do a national level, a park service unit. So he ended up helping with the state legislature do a feasibility study, which then allowed California state parks to determine that we didn't really have representative slices of these types of habitats in the state park system. It was therefore worthy of protection, and that is what kicked it off. And
Yeah, no. The species that were unique in some degree to that area. So tell me what they were. What is the focus of that protection or establishment of a state park there?
so they were specifically looking at habitat types because
See.
special species live in certain habitats. And we have one of the largest areas of California black walnut woodlands. We also have a lot of sycamore and riparian areas. So something like the southwestern pond turtle or the leaf bell's vireo would be in that. A lot of grasslands, which would be the western burrowing owl, coastal sage scrub, which would be the California gnatcatcher. So a lot of different types of habitats and a lot of different species.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, uh, I blurted out my premise at the start here. Would you agree with that, that there has been that historical battle between two sides for a long time in terms of development versus conservationists? And today, would you say that is less of a peaked battle?
I would like to think so. I
Okay.
think there are some groups that really draw a hard line, see things very black and white.
Yeah.
And I would like to think that there are some groups that see more gray now. So, for example,
On both sides
on both
of
sides,
the
that's right.
discussion, yeah.
I think developers are understanding that there are important habitats that need to be protected. That, for example, along the 91 freeway, there was a gentleman, Steve St. Clair, who had entitlements from the city of Anaheim to build 1,550 units. And it was the last connection that was viable between the Santa Ana Mountains and Chino Hills State Park. And what we have learned in science is that if we don't connect our landscapes, then the species start to die out. So all the reasons that Chino Hills State Park was protected would have been for naught if it had become an island of habitat. So he learned that early on. This was late 1990s. So that's, I think, when the tipping point of understanding conservation happened on the development side. And I think it probably took conservationists a little bit longer to understand some of the benefits of, let's say, infill housing. So that probably came along maybe 8 to 10 years later.
Yeah, no, we'll get to that in a minute. One of the things that is interesting to me is, again, from much of my legislative life, I also think there's a evolution of the environmentalist community focus. And maybe I see it wrong, but some people want to preserve property and also preserve habitat so humans don't engage with that habitat. And others that want to preserve property so that humans can recreate, see it, have hiking paths or other access points to be a part of it. I mean, where do you fall down, and where do you see the different organizations falling down in that kind of those two sides?
I think there are certain areas that should be designated at a higher level of protection, which would mean a lower level of human use. There is a designation within the state park system where you have a reserve within a state park. And so Chino Hills does have the Water Canyon Nature Preserve. And I think those areas deserve higher protection, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be able to recreate in the rest of it. We just need to have appropriate uses that are, people are educated about the trails, stay on them, don't go through riparian areas. It's an education process. And then if it's not an education process, it becomes an enforcement process.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting. So if you're on the 241 and you're heading north on the 241 and you see some rock formations, I actually think that is really special.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for the 241 cutting through that area, very few people would have ever realized that was a part of Orange County, and that natural component or the beauty that I see there, people would not see that or respect it even. And so, from my perspective, I actually see there's value in the public seeing and understanding all the full beauty within the habitat, as opposed to, okay, that's fenced off. So, I even see it driving in my car.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and talking about cars, you and I got to know each other probably best in the context of the establishment of Measure M2, the half-cent sales tax renewal. That negotiation took place in 2006, and I think Orange County was the second transportation agency in the entire state that did environmental mitigation pre-approval or a part of that measure. So as money in the half-cent sales tax went to cities and roads and highways and transit and senior mobility, there's also a carve out that said for environmental mitigation. So instead of having the battle when you're widening the 405 or widening the 22 or other elements that were a part of that in terms of the road project, as you know, there was a portion set aside to prepay some of that mitigation. And you were a very important part of that as you vice chaired that environmental committee. What was that process?
That was a lifelong project for me. I have been involved with the Orange County Transportation Authority since 2004. And as I like to jokingly say, There wasn't a lot of trust very early on. I did not speak transportation, and OCTA did not speak conservation.
Yes.
And we are both much more versed in one another's language. So what ended up happening was 30 plus environmental and community groups supported renewed Measure M, which was the first time in Orange County where conservation groups supported a transportation measure. So talk about being normally at odds with one another.
Right.
This was an unlikely alliance that we formed. And I had been managing a coalition of environmental groups through a nonprofit called Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks. And we had a list of about 80 groups, and we sent it out to them and said, we have this opportunity to preserve open space and ensure watersheds are protected and special status species are safe. But at the same time, we're going to have to agree to allow OCTA to expand and widen its freeways. And there were some deal killers that we were watching for, none of which were in the measure. So that was fantastic. But we had these 30 groups that ended up supporting the measure, and our goal was to protect and restore natural lands in Orange County. And we ended up being the reason, according to Supervisor Bill Campbell, as to why the measure passed with more than 2/3 vote from the voters.
70% of the vote in Orange County to renew/extend or create a 30-year sales tax.
That's right. And a portion of, you mentioned this, the freeway program budget, which normally goes to conservation related items. So whether it's environmental impact reports or permitting or consultations, we just said, don't spend this, one piece at a time. Let's do this comprehensively. And you can buy more land and set aside these important locations. So
that was part of the battle. I remember the first time you coming forward, the committee that then had a bucket of money that came from taxpayers for the purpose of the environmental conservation mitigation programs. What was that? About
2008 is when that committee formed.
And that was 25 million bucks or something like that?
Oh, 243.5.
243, okay.
Which, for context, was more than any proposition related to conservation had ever been allocated to Orange County. So when you combined all of the previous conservation measures for the state of California, Orange County had never gotten this much money. So this was life-changing.
And the first step was, as you were talking earlier, are there critical pieces of property that should be a part of a purchase, paying fair market value to be able to then put that land in a protected way or in a conservation or a rehabilitation state?
Yes, so there were 3 ways that the money could be spent: acquisition of land, restoration of that land, and management. So one of the important things to note is that normally management money does not come with conservation dollars. So it was important to make sure that whatever investment OCTA was going to make, that it lasted over the long term.
Yeah, no, I remember that battle. That was a percentage battle. And there were some people that said, we want to buy as much as possible, but if you do, the other 2 steps, and I had never quite understood the concept of restoration. So restoration is where things may have been trampled or used and how to bring them back to more of the natural state, or where invasive species have come and taken over from the traditional species that are in those areas.
Right.
Yeah. So give me some of those examples. Share where some of those properties were, where people today may see and understand that came from these efforts back in 2008.
Sure. So there's one in Laguna Beach called Pacific Horizon. There's, 5 in Trabuco Canyon, kind of the foothills, Trabuco Rose. I'm not going to remember all of their names, so I'll just pass on that.
Exactly.
And then
5
we have one
Trabuco.
in Northern Brea, which was adjacent to Chino Hills State Park. So there was a process, though, just to be clear, that the resource agencies who were going to be in charge of offering these permits to OCTA for the construction and expansion of the freeways, they had to approve that the habitats were needed, that we were actually offsetting the impacts from the freeway projects with these properties. So the best example I can give is if your property had redwoods on it, which I know don't exist in Orange County, really, but if they had redwoods on it and OCTA's projects were not impacting redwoods, that would not be a good purchase. And so we had to align the property with the impacts.
So you had private owners primarily coming forward saying, these properties would be available. You determined through this committee with Supervisor Pat Bates at the time, I think, chaired the committee, and you vice chaired it. So it had folks from government and then from the environmental community assess the environmental conservation value of those properties.
That's right.
And then you took that first step of purchasing and then restoring them. And then there's a pool of money now that sustains that is sustained through management from people's sales tax.
So not every property that has been purchased is being restored. There are separate restoration projects. So it could be that an open space area like the Irvine Ranch Conservancy is doing a couple of projects on the Irvine Ranch lands. There's another project at Harriet Weider Regional Park or Laguna Coast Wilderness Park. So those restoration projects could be separate from acquisition.
Mm-hmm. So earlier you were talking about the connectivity importance too. So maybe you can share with people what the whole premise of wildlife corridors are. And, if you drive on the 241, there are many wildlife corridors that allow for access of wildlife underneath primarily that roadway. So
That's right.
Why are those things important?
Those are important because we are dependent on plants and animals to actually survive our human populations. And when there was this theory of island biogeography, so if you look at a place like Hawaii, really far away from a continent, and it's really hard to attract new species to it because it's so far. And so what we learned through this science was that species that are close to mainlands, there are more species on islands than if they're far away. So kind of an immigration and extirpation of species on islands. The bigger the island, the more species you have. The smaller the island, the fewer species. So we took the concepts related to islands and applied them to the mainland. And that's why we now know that wildlife corridors need to connect together different open spaces. So I had mentioned Coal Canyon earlier. 14,000 acres of Chino Hills State Park is now connected to the Santa Ana Mountains, which is 200,000 acres. And providing a connection to the key species was mountain lions. Without the top predator, you lose all of the species down below in terms of impacts. So mountain lions prey on deer. If the deer population isn't kept in check from mountain lions, they explode in their population. What do? They eat all the plants. If you have too many deer, you're going to have some catastrophe related to population and famine. So the deer population then struggles, but without the mountain lion, all of those mid-level predators, so coyotes, foxes, possums, skunks, raccoons, they're really good raiders of birds' nests. And if the birds are struggling because somebody's eating a lot of their eggs, then we don't have plant seeds that then get, passed along through the feces of the bird as it flies. So the entire ecosystem is impacted from top to bottom when you're missing the large predator. So connecting these open spaces together is critical to maintain the suite of species in an ecosystem.
Oh, very interesting. And people I don't think would necessarily realize that is all happening,
right.
in Southern California, and probably a number of locations. So from an Orange County centric discussion, we can see what happens with Santa Ana mountains and such, but there are other similar ecosystems all over Southern California, right?
Absolutely. So there's another big connection that's being worked on right now to connect the Laguna Coast Wilderness, which is 20,000 plus acres, also to the Santa Ana Mountains. And that connection is by the 5 and the 405, that El Toro Y, I think is what they call it.
So what's being contemplated there?
They're doing studies related to a culvert crossing. So they don't have mountain lions unless they've got that rogue mountain lion that everybody knew about a couple years ago. That mountain lion somehow crossed over the 5 freeway down near San Juan Capistrano, but their largest predator is a bobcat. So the goal is to make sure that bobcats can go back and forth because they're already seeing genetic effects in the Laguna Coast. It's a kinked tail. So the bobcats have a little tail that bends to the side, it hooks, and that's because of inbreeding. So when you don't have enough species, just like an Amish population, you start to see genetic consequences. So connecting underneath the 5 freeway with a culvert is what they're looking at. We'll see if a bridge might be something feasible. We've all heard about the Wallace-Annenberg Bridge up on the 101 freeway. So you can go over a roadway or you can go under a roadway.
I think this is the first time that there has been the correlation or the representation between bobcats and Amish, so that's.
Everyone understands that, though.
Well, I don't know if the Amish do, but still, or the bobcats for that matter. But when you look at Orange County, I mean, could you describe the impact that Donald Bren has had in land conservation? I mean, the Irvine Company, of course, noted for developments of so many communities, but also over the last decade or so, his contribution of land and the establishment of a conservancy to maintain that land has been really critical in a lot of this whole discussion.
That's right. A lot of the Orange County Regional Park system is because of Donald Bren and the Irvine Company. And he had the vision and foresight to look ahead in terms of, hey, I want to create these developments, a master plan community in Irvine, for example. I know I'm going to have to mitigate it. What can we do in advance? And so this concept of advanced mitigation had already been in play prior to OCTA's advanced mitigation program. It just applied to houses and infrastructure. So the transportation corridor agencies and their 241, 261 highways were also part of that mitigation program. So Orange County, I don't know if you know this, was the first county in the state to use the Natural Communities Conservation Planning Act to create a mitigation program that paralleled the federal version, which was a habitat conservation plan that allowed the development to happen, but at the same time mitigated it in advance. And so what you see on both sides of the 241 and 261
and 73
right. Yep, and part of the 133 as well, right. Are mitigation lands from that NCCP HCP, which is the long acronym for a conservation plan.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So with Donald Bren, as mayor of Anaheim, when I came there, I think there were 5,000 houses planned for up in the canyon. They reduced it to a 2,500 house plan, and then basically stepped away from that and donated that land to the county. I think there's a veteran cemetery is one of the uses contemplated, but I was given a tour up that canyon, as I'm sure you have had too, and it really is, again, one of those unbelievable things for me to see the different types of habitat. In this case, a lot of water and sycamore trees, that sycamore grove that's back up in there. And I think it gives you a greater appreciation for the land. We live in a community where it's pretty much, where we live is built out, but we do have an opportunity to see habitat that's not been built out.
That's right.
And I think that is kind of valuable as a collective for people to see and understand and respect.
Absolutely. I would also add, though, that Orange County is really special in terms of its habitats, and Southern California just in general. Going way back in time to like the Pleistocene, so 10,000 years ago, we didn't have glaciers.
I can't remember that. No.
I can't remember it either.
Oh, okay.
But we didn't have glaciers that scraped the bedrock clean. So the plants and animals that live here have had a really long time to evolve, and they've differentiated because of earthquakes. And so we have different elevations that have allowed these plants and animals to go up and down and sideways. And one of the cool things about the area that you're talking about is a tree called a Tecate cypress. And there are only 20 stands worldwide, and most of them are in Southern California or Mexico. But we've got the northernmost stand in Orange County. Only 20 of these left in the entire 20 populations of Tecate cypress are left in the whole world, and we have one of them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yep.
But that's awesome, though. And as I think a lot of that park system develops and has created, people have greater opportunities to access through hiking and other, more passive functions, but still have the opportunity to see all that.
Yes, and I do want to say, as an interesting side note, so Donald Bren, when he's made some of these dedications, a lot of people were really happy about open space being set aside. And let's be honest, he got a great tax break. Like, there's a huge benefit on that. But back to his vision and foresight. I know there are some differences in the environmental community about levels of appreciation, but I think credit needs to go where credit is deserved.
Right.
And when he made his last dedication of about 20,000 acres, I sent him a thank you note to the Irvine Company headquarters. I had no idea if he would even get the letter, but he did. And he wrote me back and said he was so appreciative to hear from somebody in the environmental community. And I think those are the relationships that I'm aiming for, where just because we may be on opposite sides of a discussion, just like with Senator Pat Bates, we could disagree on 500 things, but we focused on the one thing that we both cared about and were trying to advance.
That's kind of why you're here.
That's right.
We don't have to agree on every
That's
element
right.
or technical decision. But one thing I think we do agree on is, housing. And I guess the way I kind of started this is there used to be a tremendous conflict between housing, expansion, growth of housing, and environmentalism, conservation, and there has been a big shift. And we've talked about it. You're on the Brea Planning Commission, so you have voted to build a lot of housing, and I think that's important. So do you see that shift now as maybe the ripe fields for development of housing are infill, replacing other commercial, industrial, residential uses that have been there before on that same piece of property, as opposed to going into raw habitat areas?
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that if an area has already been developed, the impact has already been seen for the most part.
Right.
If you're building a 10-story, apartment complex, sure, there may be additional impacts, but I think we're getting more sophisticated in our planning approach. And I would like to think that adaptive reuse, for example, is something that we should be looking at. We can reuse some of these locations. The best example I always think of is the Citizen Hotel up in Sacramento, which used to be offices, and now it's a hotel. That's a great use of a property where you didn't have to tear it down. You just reinvented the insides.
Right. Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, and I think you saw in Brea the addition of housing where the Sears building was. I mean, Sears is basically out of business, so that even though that's, I think, that might be the second most productive sales tax malls in Orange County, is putting housing in on that mall location. So you have more people there in an already built out area with parking and access and all those things.
That's an important thing to note related to access. If we're trying to meet statewide goals for reducing vehicle miles traveled or getting people out of their cars, if you put people in places where they could walk to it, you've shifted the dynamics of what people do to get from point A to point B. They can walk, they can ride their bike.
Right. Now, I see also in your resume, or what ChatGPT pushed out for me, you have been a part of the Randall, the Randall Preserve Project. Tell me what that is.
So there was a development company that was looking at 1,500 and I'm going to get my numbers wrong, 1,375 units, and it's
just say it boldly. No one will question
okay.
that.
I'll think of that next time. So it's at the mouth of the Santa Ana River,
Right.
and it's county territory, but it abuts Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, and Costa Mesa. And it was 401 acres, and this company was interested in developing it, and there were a lot of special status species on the property, more than 18 of them, and a lot of vernal pools, which are protected both by the Coastal Act and through Fish and Game, both the state and federal levels. And we worked to get it protected. And Frank and Joan Randall committed $50 million to buy the $97 million purchase price of this land. And we ended up getting grants from other state sources and a federal source and pulled together that $97 million. And now I'm working very closely with the Mountains Recreation and Conservation Authority, which is a joint powers authority, that focuses on conservation, habitat areas, and recreation. And we have been doing a large planning process to figure out where those special status species are, where the public access can occur, and then planning for sea level rise, because we anticipate that the lowlands on the property is going to be pretty much completely underwater if with 4 feet of sea level rise.
Well, no, this has been very good. So I really, it's been a long time since we've had a chance to sit down. I respect your work and certainly have watched it for a long time. And I think this is the first time I've seen you with bright colored hair. So you were sharing with me that story and how that came about. So maybe you could share it with others.
Absolutely. So my hair has become my kind of staple look at this point, and it allows me to talk about a disease called spinal muscular atrophy, which is a terminal disease for type 1. And my twin sister, who has a daughter who's got this terminal disease, and we converted our advocacy skills from environmentalism over to the healthcare side.
And we talked about that. That may be a more tougher job to address healthcare than environmental issues.
That's right. That's right. So from, nursing wages to testing for this disease to treatments for this disease, we ended up working with Sophia's Cure out of New York to get a cure squared away. And as soon as Kennedy was eligible for the first treatment of this disease, being the crazy auntie that I am, I said, let's all put her favorite color in our hair. And so we added hot pink to our hair, and it has been my hair color ever since.
That's great. That's great. And again, bringing awareness to this disease and
That's right.
Fighting for a cure and treatment for that.
Yep.
Well, that's wonderful. It is so good to have you here. I love the fact that I have friends who we don't have to agree on everything in this world we live in. That's sometimes a requirement for relationships, but I really do appreciate you coming in and sharing all in what you've been doing and the importance of what you do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I will say, non-traditional partnerships, I think, is my specialty. And you've been one of the people that has pushed me in that direction. So back when you were serving on the OCTA board, it was always an interesting dialogue with you where you challenged my thinking. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you.